In this video, we're going to create an environment object that maintains our list of locations that we retrieved from CloudKit. And then towards the end, I'm going to show you how to use the basic MapKit annotations, before we build our custom ones later. Let me give a quick review on what an environment object is. Again, we cover this in SwiftUI fundamentals, but I'll review it real quick. So to put it simply, an environment object is accessible from multiple views. But what views have access to it depends on where you inject it. So what I mean by it matters where you inject it is, where you inject your environment object, all the views that are downstream in the view hierarchy will have access to it. Like in our example, we're going to inject our environment object right at the root of our tab view. So that means all of our tabs will have access to this location manager that we're going to create. And we did that because, our map view needs access to that list of locations, and then our location list tab needs access to that list of locations. Our profile, not so much, but that's fine. So when we inject it, when we create our tab view, that basically gives it to our whole app, which is what we wanted. But you don't always have to do that. A classic example I use is if you have a pretty involved settings screen, kind of like Apple's default settings, right? Well, you can see as I'm navigating through these screens, there's multiple views downstream in the view hierarchy from this settings. So let's say you had a settings object that you were maintaining as the user selects all the settings. Well, you can inject that back to the root view of the settings. That way, no matter where they navigate, as long as they're downstream of where you injected it, all those views will have access to that environment object. And a big reason for this is so that you don't have to be passing bindings, down 4 layers of child views, right? Just keep passing it down, put it in the environment. Now all these views downstream have access to the environment object. Okay, so back in Xcode, in the utilities folder, you see we have our CloudKit manager. This is what I said I like to organize my utilities, right? So I'm going to create a new group on the utilities folder, call it managers. So create the managers folder, go into CloudKit manager, drag that up there. Now in the managers folder, create new file. We're going to call this Swift file, hit next. Call this location manager, hit return. And now our location manager is actually going to be quite simple. For now, we're going to add a little bit more later, but it's basically just our array of locations. So let's do final class, very similar to a view model. It's got to be a class, and it's got to conform to observable object. So let's say location manager, again, conforms to observable object. Again, basically the same as if you're creating your view model. So now we want to do at published var called locations, and that is an array of DDG location, and it's just an empty array to start. Okay, so that's all there is for right now. And you'll notice it's published. So just like the view models, anything that is like listening to our environment object will update its UI when these locations change. All right, so now that we have this object created, let's inject it into the environment of our tab view. So to do that, we don't go to the tab view. Don't be confused there. We go to the app, www.grub.app, right? Because this is where the tab view is created. So this is where we inject it. So here we're going to create a variable. We'll say let location manager equal. We'll initialize the new location manager. So this happens like on the launch of the app, right? This is what the app does, this at main. Again, we cover this in detail in SwiftUI fundamentals. I'll link to some blog posts in the description if you're not familiar with what app is. That way you can dive in deeper. So, okay, so we created this location manager, this object, basically on launch. And then now on the app tab view, there's a modifier. We can say .environmentObject, you can see there. And then we just pass in the object that we want to inject. And that's our location manager that we just created up there. And again, like I said, if it's one line, I like to just do it like that. So now, again, on launch, we've created location manager. We've injected it into the environment at the app tab view. And because we injected it there, if I go to the app tab view, so that means all the downstream views. And in our case, if you look, location map view is a downstream view, location list view is a downstream view, and profile view is a downstream view. So these all have access to that environment object. So let's actually use it on the location map view. So here we are, location map view. So here's how you access it. I'm going to do at environment object, private var, and we'll call this location manager. And it is of type location manager, right? You don't like initialize it with anything, because this is a reference to this location manager, right? Because we want this to basically live in memory. We don't want to constantly be recreating it because it is going to hold our list of locations that we're going to be using all throughout our app. Okay, so back to location map view here. So now we have access to it. So now in our view model here where we're getting locations, let me open up the view model, right? This get locations. Well, you see we have this array here that we were kind of using temporarily, right? However, this array of locations is on our location manager. So let's get rid of this. So what that means is that our get locations function, where you see it's setting locations equal to the locations we get back from CloudKit, well, we need to set our environment objects locations equal to the locations we got back. Because remember, that's the location manager is going to hold that for us to use throughout the app. But our view model doesn't have access to that environment object. Remember, the environment object, only the views downstream, because all these views are kind of related, right? Because they're all bundled in the tab view. So they're all in the same view hierarchy. However, our map view model is a class that is just an object we created. It's kind of like floating in the ether, right? The only way it knows anything is when we connected it to the map view here by creating it as our view model. So here's a little, again, personal style, if you will. There is a way to get your environment object, into your view model, essentially. And I'll link to a Stack Overflow article that explains this. And there's also an answer in there that explains why you shouldn't use MVVM with SwiftUI. And I think it's an interesting read. And I read it, I'm like, oh, that has some good points. I don't fully agree with it, which is obviously why I'm still doing what I'm doing. But again, it just goes to show that SwiftUI is so young and all the best practices aren't fully figured out yet. So this is my warning in SwiftUI fundamentals. If you're diving into SwiftUI right now, the best advice I can give you is you're going to need to be okay with change because, again, it is still young, it is still maturing, it is going to change a lot, potentially very soon at WWDC in a couple weeks. But anyway, let me tell you why I chose not to have the environment object in my view model. Because, again, you can check out the Stack Overflow article. I felt it led to more confusing and convoluted code rather than just having my environment object here. And you'll see in a second, we're just going to pass the reference to that environment object via this get locations function right here. And this is another philosophical thing, right? These architectures, MVVM, MVC, Viper, whatever you decide to use, they're not like you must follow these rules at all costs. There are guidelines, and yes, you should follow them mostly so your code is organized and all that stuff, but it doesn't mean they're unbreakable. You kind of have to use your own judgment. And I felt the code is easier to understand, easier to work with, easier to use by just having the environment object here and passing a reference through this function to the view model. And again, you can look at the Stack Overflow article to see the hoops you kind of have to jump through and then maybe judge for yourself. But I want to tell you why I chose to do that. So let's go to location map view. And now in our function here, I need to pass in the reference to our location manager. So I'll say for location manager, and that is going to take in a type of location manager. And then now instead of self.locations, which we no longer have, this is just location manager. And again, that will update our object here, this object, because when you're passing around a class, you're passing it around by reference, not the same as value types, basic Swift stuff there. So now when I do viewModel.getLocations, I should have to pass in a location manager. And again, good thing I have this location manager right there. So we will just pass that in. So before we test this, let me just kind of walk through all that connection and recap what we just did now that everything's in place. So again, we created our location manager object, which for now is just it's going to hold our array of locations. And again, it's always going to be kind of accessible from all of our views because we're going to use this list of locations, for a lot of stuff. And then here in the app, www.grub.app, we had to create the location manager, right? We're creating it at launch, and then we're injecting it at the root view of our app. So basically our entire app has access to it. Again, wherever you inject your environment object, all the views downstream will have access to it. If there's a situation where you don't want your whole app to have it, just one section of your app, we'll just inject it at the root of that section. Okay, and then back to the location map view. Here's how you access your environment object, right? Using the @environmentObject property wrapper. Now I have access to it. And then here I am passing the reference for the location manager into my view model. So the view model can now do its network call and then set the locations equal to, I messed something up. The location manager has a .locations equals locations, right? So good thing we reviewed that. Well, Xcode obviously yelled at me and told me, but yes, so the location manager is just the object. It has a property on it, right? A variable called locations that we need to set equal to that. So maybe you picked that up before I even did. Again, when you're talking and explaining, easy to miss stuff. So yeah, you want to set your location manager dot locations equal to the locations that we get back. Now, another quick thing here, kind of a side note, but I don't want to forget about it. So remember, we just set up this network call just to test it real quick. However, these published variables, right? And then same thing on our location manager at published. Well, even though, view model. Even though just setting your alert item doesn't look like you're updating the UI, well, you are, because anytime you update a thing that's published in Swift UI, it's going to trigger a UI update. So when we set alert item, that's triggering a UI update. When we set location manager equal to locations, that's triggering a UI update. So for that, we want to make sure we update our UI on the main thread. So I'm going to put this entire switch case to dispatch queue.main.async, and then we'll cut and paste it. That way, we are updating our UI on the main thread. And then the last little bit with these locations, if I go back to location map view, we only want to, we don't want to get locations every time we come to this view on appear, right? Because on appear fires every time you go. So let's do a quick little check. If location manager.locations.is empty, then get this, right? But if it's not empty, don't make that call. And again, that way we're not making a network call every time, right? If we already got our locations, no need to get them again because they're not updating too, right? Our list of locations is static. Okay, so to finish out the video, let's talk about map pins. And I'm gonna show you just the basic default because they're relatively simple. So up here in map, right, we have the coordinate region. That's all we passed in. So I'm actually gonna rewrite this. Let's not forget about ignore safe area. So I'll do map, and I'm doing this so I can show you the initializer. Well, here we have a bunch, coordinate region. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. We'll be adding to this, but I'm doing this again as a process here. So coordinate region and annotation items and annotation content. So we already know what the region is, right? That is viewModel.region, did that before. Now annotation items, this is our array of locations. That again is our location manager.locations. Now, you see, for the content for the map pins, they have to be identifiable. Very similar to if you're making a list or a grid. So I'm gonna hit return here, and these are my, this is a location, right? It's gonna iterate through my locations and build a map pin based on each location. Now, it doesn't, I'll see if I can make this bigger. There we go. We don't conform to identifiable. So let's go ahead and update our DDG location real quick to conform to identifiable. So in DDG location, our model, DDG location. Now we're going to conform to identifiable, and we could have done this earlier in our list, but you'll see how our list is going to be updated as well. So we don't conform to it. So let's add the protocol stubs. Okay, cool. So to conform to identifiable, you just need to have a variable for ID, and this can be a UUID, which our ckrecord.id is a UUID. So let's just delete that. I know it's going to yell at me again, but we're going to change this to a ID. Not OD, ID. And it is a CK record ID. So do a command B. Okay, cool. Yep, we just basically changed the name of this variable. No longer CK record ID. Do a command B. We're going to get errors popped up, right? Because we were using that before. So I'm going to click on the red X up here to take me to my errors. Oh, that's just that. We already did that. Okay, maybe not. I thought in our mock data we had that, but I don't know. Xcode might take a little bit to catch up. But now that our location conforms to identifiable, do command B, because we still have the editor here. So now in order to get a map pin, it's literally map pin, there you go. And then you see it takes a coordinate and a tint. So the coordinate is a CL location coordinate 2D. And our location property, right, on our DDG location, if we go back to that, right, this location property, you see, is a CL location. Now a property of a CL location is a coordinate. So we're going to basically have location.coordinate to get our Latin long, right? The Latin long is already built into the CL location. Remember, that's how we created that. So back to the location map view. Now, this is where some naming gets weird. So we want to do location, which is, again, the location that we're iterating over in our array of locations that are up on our location manager. But our location has a property called location. So it's location.location, and then the location has a coordinate.coordinate. And then the color, right? What color do you want your map pin? So we're going to do .brand primary. Now, a quick note on this naming here. In order to kind of like get rid of this weird naming, you would have to completely change our location name. Instead of DDG location, maybe it would be DDG restaurant, DDG eatery, DDG establishment, like, I don't know. And I liked the location name. To me, that made more sense. So rather than like changing that whole name and having that all different, I'll just live with this kind of weird little naming right here. Again, some of the decisions you have to make about your code base. So that's my reasoning why. So here's our map pin. Let's do a Command B. I'm still expecting more errors. Yeah, okay. This is what I was expecting before because we no longer have CK record ID. And again, this is a way to improve our list anyway. When you conform to identifiable, you don't have to specify like what ID you want to sort this by because it already knows. It conforms to identifiable. It has an ID. It's automatically going to use that ID property on our DDG location, which again is our CK record ID. So now we can just kind of get rid of that. And I thought there was one more in our mock data. Am I wrong? Did we miss that? Am I confusing my beta app versus this app? Yeah, okay. I guess we aren't using it there. I thought we were using it there. Okay, anyway, back to location map view. So now our map takes in a parameter of a region. We already did that. It needs an array of annotation items, right? It needs to know what to show, and that is going to be our array of locations. And then it's going to iterate through those locations, drop a map pin at the coordinate, which is our location.coordinate, and then, hey, make it brand primary. So now let's run this, and we should see the old school map pins, like if you still had an iPhone 4. And here we are. You can see our map pins on the map. Again, that's that old school look. You can see the color is the brand primary. And then up at the top in our status bar, we forgot the ignore safe area. Remember, I even said, let's make sure we don't forget that. Yeah, I forgot that. Good thing it's obvious though. So that is the old school map pin. Let me show you like the newer map balloon. They're actually called map markers here. But first on our map, let's do .ignores safe area so we don't forget that. So now a map marker, so just instead of pin, type map marker, and it takes in the same function signature here. It takes in a coordinate and a tint. Now if we run this, we're going to get the more up-to-date looking map balloons. And there you go. See, right? This looks more up to date, more modern. And again, the color, you can change it however you like. Now we're going to stop here with the map annotations. Of course, in a future video, we're going to create this custom annotation that you see on the final product, has the badge, has the picture, the custom shape. But this is also a quick note on how I develop, right? I develop in layers. So the way I look at this, cool, I got the map working. Our app still needs a lot of work, right? I need to go to the locations list and I need to show our list of locations. I need to even build a profile. We don't even have that concept yet. And then I need to be able to check in and check out. So I like to go in like layers to get the basic functionality working, then come back and add like the polish because I consider like our custom map annotations like a layer of polish, right? I look at it like, have you ever seen those YouTube videos where they talk about, building the CGI for movies or TV shows and they show like the CGI before any polish and it looks like crap. And then they show another layer of polish and there's like 8 layers of polish before you get the final like Avengers Endgame scene that looks crazy, That's how I look at my development, right? I do layers of polish. And right now we're on like the base layer, just getting the functionality working. So we're just going to continue to come back, go over layer by layer, start adding polish, all the handling the errors, all that stuff. So if we leave and move on from a screen this early in the course and you feel like I forgot something or it's not quite done, just keep that in mind. We're going to come back layer after layer after layer as we polish this app into the finished product. And again, that's just my style of development, just how I do things. But we're good to go here on our location manager objects and showing the pin. Now let's work on our location list view and our location detail view.